Welcome to Ground Control. If you guys follow our Facebook page, then you already know I pulled the trigger on the Arrows Viper 50mm EDF jet, and I also pulled the trigger on the Arrows T33 Shooting Star 50mm EDF jet. I went there specifically for this, and then when I saw the T33, I couldn't resist. Resistance was futile. I had been looking at the Viper for quite a long time, but I was so covered up with stuff, I was just afraid to pull the trigger on it because I didn't think I would have time to mess with it. So now that I'm fairly caught up on stuff, I went ahead and pulled the trigger, and that didn't make me busy enough, so I got the T33 as well. But anyway, from everything that I have seen, this is an excellent flying 50mm jet with adequate power to do aerobatics. I just finished programming this a few minutes ago. I'll go over some of the specs with you on this plane, and I'll tell you what my plans are for it. So I have a Lemon RX 6-channel DSMX receiver in it, and here in a minute I'll throw up on the screen a picture inside the equipment bay. It's, it doesn't look like there would be much room in that equipment bay, but it's quite a bit. And that receiver with the Velcro and everything weighs about 8 grams. The recommended battery for this plane is a 3S 1300 milliamp hour 30C LiPo, which I have four or five of those, I think. And so I have the specified battery, and mine weigh 106 grams. The recommended flying weight is 470 grams. So with the receiver and the recommended battery in it, my all-up weight is 468.4 grams. Now, having said that, I am going to have to put some landing skids on here, and typically that will add somewhere between 8 to 10 grams. So if I can keep it down to 8 grams, that'll put me, 6 grams over the recommended flying weight. So not bad, especially since this, from what I've seen so far, it has adequate power. So 6 grams over shouldn't amount to much of anything. I set up my ailerons. They have 2 different settings for your ailerons and your elevator for your control surface deflection. They have a low rate and a high rate. The low rate is 8 millimeters of movement up and down on the elevator and the ailerons. And the high rate is 10 millimeter up and down on the ailerons and the elevator. They both have the same amount of recommended control surface movement up and down. So that's what I have mine set at. I have my control rod connections at the control horns on the bottom hole, the outermost hole on the elevators and the ailerons. And then I had to dial my dual rate all the way down to 70% on the elevator and the ailerons to keep the movement no more than 10 millimeters. And I hate to go below 70% on dual rate because I think you end up losing resolution on the control and the transmitter when you go below 70% on dual rate. So that's where I have it right now. Now, I also had someone post that on this Viper, the recommended movements on the control surface are pretty aggressive. Now, I normally set up my planes for fairly aggressive control surface movement, but I also put in a lot of expo. So just to be on the safe side with this jet, I put expo of 60% on the ailerons and on the elevator. Now, if that's too much, I would rather the control surfaces be a little soft than be too abrupt, because that makes it hard to control. You can control a plane just fine if the controls are a little soft, but sometimes that makes it very difficult to control a plane if the control surface movements are abrupt and twitchy. So hopefully the 10 millimeter movement up and down on the control surfaces and 60% expo will smooth it out. We'll find out. If that doesn't work, then I'm going to have to change my linkage again so that I don't have to go under 70% dual rate. The motor it has is the same size motor and same kV motor I have seen on all of these 50mm jets I've looked at so far. So it must be a very popular motor for 50mm EDF jets. It's a 2627 4500 kV motor. This one has an 11 blade fan. So every one of the 50mm EDF jets I've looked at, not just Arrows but other vendors, they've always listed the same size motor with the same kV, and the only difference is some of them will have 11 blade fans, some of them will have 12 blade fans. This one has an 11. The T-33 has the exact same power system as this with the same recommended LIPO, but it's a little heavier plane. So the ESC is a 30 amp ESC and has a 3 amp BEC. I don't know if that's a linear BEC or a switching BEC. They didn't really say. The wingspan is 30.5 inches at 773.5 millimeters, and the length is 27.4 inches, which is 696 millimeters. The recommended center of gravity is 60 to 70 millimeters from the leading edge of the wing, and in the diagram it shows where the leading edge of the wing meets the lurks here. So that's where I measured from. I hope that is correct. And I have my CG at 65 millimeters back from where the leading edge of the wing meets the lurk. So my CG is right here, right in the midpoint of the recommended CG, and I have my battery positioned so that it has a neutral balance at that point, you know. So when I balance on that, it stays nice and level. And I'll throw up the picture of the equipment bay right now, and if you look, once I get my CG set and I get my battery position right where I want it, I just take a Sharpie and I make a straight line at where the back edge of the LIPO should be. So if you look at that equipment bay, you'll also see that black line that I've put on the side of the fuselage next to the battery, just to make sure that when I'm switching out batteries, I get the battery in the same position every single time, and so I'm not having to worry about if my CG is going to be right on the mark or if it's going to be off. If I do that every time, my CG is always going to be right on the mark. Okay, so some more information on this. Let's see. It has 3 9-gram servos, and just like the T-33, it says 3 9-gram servos, and it says in the T-33 description that they are, you know, the nylon gear, the plastic gear servos. Now, as far as I can tell, these servos are analog, and the reason that I say that is because normally, if they're digital servos, they will tell you they're digital servos. But if you set your control surfaces up to neutral, right, center up your servos, center up your control surfaces, and then actuate your control surfaces. When the servos are analog, and you actuate like the ailerons all the way over to the left or all the way to the right, and then you center your stick. Normally what you'll see is that the control surfaces will come up close to center, but they won't perfectly center. And that's typical of analog servos. Now, digital servos are very good at hitting their centers every time. So I always look for that. When they don't specify digital servos, I always look for that. And on this plane and on the T-33, when I actuate the control sticks all the way one direction and then the other direction, same thing with the elevator up and down, the control surfaces don't come back up perfectly to neutral. So my guess is those are actually analog servos. Okay, so this is just a bank and yank plane. It just has elevator and ailerons. There is no rudder. Most of the stuff that I fly, and I started with bank and yank planes, so I'm used to flying planes that are just elevator and aileron. So that's not a problem. And then let's go over what the assembly was like on this. Okay, so for the assembly on this jet, this is one of the easiest to assemble planes I've had so far. And you have 4 screws to bolt the main wing onto the fuselage. The wing is all one complete section. You're not having to glue 2 sections of the wing together, put in a carbon rod, and then attach it to the fuselage. It comes as one solid unit, and then you just bolt it to the fuselage with 4 small screws. And the receivers for the screws, you know, the receivers on the bottom of the wing and on the fuselage. You know, they have a little nub that allows these two plastic pieces to overlap each other so that you get everything lined up before you ever drop a screw in there. So that was really nice. You do have to glue on the winglets, and you have to glue on the horizontal stabilizer, and that's it. So what is that, 4 components you got to put on. The only way they could have made it any easier to assemble would have been if there was a screw that held the winglets on and a couple of screws that hold the horizontal stabilizer on, so that you didn't have to use any glue at all, because then it would be ready to go. I mean, that would have made it the easiest possible, because, you know, I bolted the main wing on, glued on the winglets, glued on the horizontal stabilizers, and I basically had to wait for the glue to cure before I did anything else to it. But that is pretty darn easy, and the quality looks really good. And of course, after I fitted everything together before I ever glued it, and everything went together perfectly. There were no problems whatsoever. So awesome quality on this jet, especially for the price that you pay for it. Okay, so the other thing that I plan on doing with this jet and with the T-33, now the T-33 is going to be about 30 grams heavier than this one, I think. I think it's 25 grams heavier. The recommended flying weight for this one, I think, is 470 grams. The recommended flying weight for the T-33, because that airframe is heavier, is 495 grams. And they both use the same recommended LIPO, and they both use the same power system. So this one has got to have a better thrust weight ratio than the T-33, right? Everything else being equal. So once I get the skids on this, I'll be probably around 478, 480 grams. But on my free wing F-86, if you guys have watched the videos of that, you know that it was extremely underpowered when I first got it. I'm currently flying it with a 4S on what I refer to as a 3S Plus power system. Well, I knew there were going to be other good candidates for that. So on the T-33, which has the same power system as this, I ran it up with a fully charged 3S LiPo. It was pulling 22.8 amps on that 30 amp ESC, so lots of headroom. So what I'm going to do with this and what I'm going to do with the T-33, once I do the review stock with the 3S LiPo, is I'm going to create another model file for 3S Plus power system, and by putting the 4S LiPo in it and limiting the top end of the throttle at 80%, which is where you're going to hit 30 amps on that speed controller, this jet and that T-33 should be little rockets, because these two are starting off with a lot more power on the 3S than that F-86 64mm did on the 3S. And when I put a 4S in it and limited the top end of the throttle at 70%, not 80%, it turned that F-86 into a little rocket ship. So I don't have any doubt that these are going to have a tremendous amount of power and be a tremendous amount of fun once I take them out and fly them with the 4S LiPos. I have 4S 1300 milliamp hour 70C LiPos that are supposed to be delivered on the 26th, Tuesday. So, man, I'm hoping those arrive on time, because I would love to take both these planes out later on this coming week, and fly them with the 3S Plus power system just to see. But I think it's going to be an absolute blast. So stay tuned. If things work out, if I can get these landing skids on this set up tonight, ready to go for tomorrow. Tomorrow morning I'm supposed to have favorable winds to go fly. I've got my T-33 already ready to go. I've got all my batteries charged. If I can get landing skids on this today, I will be taking this out tomorrow morning too, and I'll be able to maiden both of those jets on the same day. I think that's only ever happened maybe twice before, where I actually had two planes to maiden in the same day. So it's going to be a really fun morning for me tomorrow, weather permitting. So stay tuned for the launch, the maiden launch of this and the T-33, and I will see you in the air.